Hi, everybody. Welcome to our weekly NASCAR fantasy racing pit stop hangout here on Google Plus on our On Pit Row Facebook page, and if you follow us, our on Pit Row YouTube page as well. I'm joined by a fantasy racing expert, the king of fantasy NASCAR racing, Dan Beaver, joins us. How you doing, Dan?
Yeah, it's great to be king.
Isn't it? It's good. You need some new edicts.
I need to off with some heads.
There you go. I thought maybe Jimmy Johnson was the king this week, but we'll get into that, I suppose, a little bit as we start talking about the next race at Dover. Jimmy Johnson, of course, won the Coca-Cola 600 last Sunday night at Charlotte Motor Speedway. This week, we're going to start the hangout off talking about. What are we going to talk about first? The NASCAR.com game. I guess salary cap games in general for the first segment of the show. We'll talk about maybe what you should do if you're thinking about playing one of those games, if you're involved with one of those games, and we're going to Dover, the Monster Mile this Sunday.
Yeah, and I think fantasy game or salary cap games are among the most interesting ones out there if they're managed right. It's not just trying to figure out who's going to win, which is difficult enough in its own right, but then trying to figure out who those good picks are going to be in the 20 to 30th position range, likely to finish there, and who's going to be a good value because of other external factors. Either they ran poorly to begin with and now they're surging, or in the case of the NASCAR.com game, one of the scoring categories is place differential. So you got to keep a constant look for those drivers who are starting at the rear of the field and won't necessarily win, but if they pick up 20, 30 positions, like Ryan Newman did last week, then they become fantasy relevant. They become one of the better values. So the nice thing about salary cap games is each of them are a little bit different. The one I play most is NASCAR.com, obviously, because of my affiliation with them in the past. But they're all a little bit different. They all behave. You got to know the quirks, but you also have to pick those drivers who are going to get on a kind of place and hold drivers who get on a swing. It's a good segue to the Jimmy Johnson thing. What you said.
yeah, my Jimmy Johnson comment. Okay, I didn't mean to throw you off there.
Yeah, apparently the word comment is the one that was just completely screwing me up there.
That's all right.
Okay, nice segue to the Jimmy Johnson comment. Now that he's won a race, he's probably going to get on a good swing. And in salary cap games, because he struggled the way he did at the beginning of the season, he probably started off pretty high. His salary cap has dropped, and now it's going to start to go back up to the point where he's one of the most expensive drivers in the game again. And this is a good time to get on his bandwagon and ride him until he falls off.
Yeah, I mean, Dover is definitely one of his racetracks. I would think you have to give him strong consideration there. But when you have a driver like Jimmy Johnson, who's had a real strong history at a track like Dover, and you're going there, and he's on a bit of a roll. How much does where he starts play into your pick when you're in a salary cap game? How much does that place differential, those points that you could get from that, play into that? If you're assuming he's going to qualify well here, how much does that take away from his value as a pick at Dover?
In this case, it doesn't. The NASCAR.com game specifically, you're looking at two different things, and each of them are equally important. You get points for fastest laps run and laps led. You get points for place differential, and you get points for finishing position. And a driver like Jimmy Johnson has the capacity to dominate the points regardless of where he starts. He's going to get fastest laps run. He's going to get laps led. In a game that has something like average running position, he's going to stay in the front of the pack for a significant amount of time. So that even if he finishes in the 5th position after qualifying on the pole and loses 4 place differential points, he's going to be one of the better bets in the game. A driver who traditionally qualifies poorly, like Matt Kenseth, qualifies just as badly at Dover as he does on other tracks. He's going to make up place differential points, and he has the capacity to win if he gets off of this. He hasn't been terribly impressive at the beginning of the season, like Johnson, but it was notable that both of them raced for the win last week at Charlotte, and he's coming back. So is he there yet? Probably not, but he's probably still a good play because he's going to get place differential points in games that offer that. And he's probably going to finish in the top 5 for games that are just concerned with finishing position.
I'm asking you just a little bit about general strategy on a salary cap game like this. When you go into your week to play one of these games, do you have I assume that you set your roster with like placeholders for what you think is going to be likely picks for you, and then you adjust based on qualifying and practice after that? Do you have, like, when you have a guy in a low number, whatever the salary cap number would be, maybe $10 or less than $10? Do you have a group of 4 or 5 of those drivers that you're looking at to see who qualifies the worst? I mean, what are we looking for there?
I usually work from the top, the bottom, and then the middle. You look for the drivers that are going to be your studs, and they're probably not going to change very much from midweek to the weekend. Jimmy Johnson is probably a stud. He's going to he's going to be a good value now. There's nothing really that, unless he wrecks in practice or just runs around in the back of the pack all day on Saturday and Friday, he's not going to do anything to dissuade you from picking him. Then you look at the bottom, and you're looking only for good values there. You're looking for a driver who has a good average improvement overall, tends to qualify poorly, and moves forward in the race, but are not terribly expensive because it's a little bit more of a risk associated with taking those drivers. Then you see how much money you have left, and you take care of the drivers in the middle. So I'll get 1 or 2 drivers at the top, 1 or 2 drivers at the bottom, and then that leaves either 1 driver in the middle or 2 drivers in the middle that you have to look at and make a pick based on what's happened during the weekend.
Okay, so what are we looking at for Dover this week? What are your calls this early? I mean, I guess it's not terribly early in the week, but we haven't practiced or qualified yet. It's Thursday afternoon. Where would you advise people to start? I guess maybe that's the question I want to ask.
Yeah, and it's early. This is just as early on Thursday as it is on Monday. We don't know anything more than we knew when the series rolled out of Charlotte Sunday night. So I'm this year. I think current momentum, current record in 2014 is a little more important than track records have been. So I'm looking at those drivers who are coming in with some momentum. It's impossible not to think in terms of Kevin Harvick being a good value, Jimmy Johnson, Jeff Gordon. Those are guys that have been good all year long. Kevin Harvick's been uneven, but now he has 3 consecutive top 10s, finished second in the last 2 races, and could have won both of those last 2 races. Granted, they were both cookie-cutter courses, mile-and-a-half courses. He isn't nearly as strong at Dover as he has been in the past, but I don't think that's going to matter. This year, I think it makes more difference. The bigger difference is what he's doing with the team. So I'm looking at drivers with current momentum. Carl Edwards is a good mid-cap pick. It's a little bit more expensive in the NASCAR game probably than he's worth, but it's been hard to adjust him down because he's been running consistent. He's been running in the top 10. And Roush Fenway Racing has a good record at Dover, so Carl's got a pretty good option there. And if the rumors are to be believed, and both he and Biffle are likely candidates to leave Roush Fenway, then he's looking for a better finish than he might otherwise have, just to make sure that he gets his salary negotiations with either Roush or the new team gets the best position there. So those are the factors I think that go into this week. And then in something like a salary cap game, you have to pay attention to the drivers who are doing their first race, like Brett Moffitt in the number 66. He's probably not going to finish better than 35th, maybe in the low 30s if there's a lot of attrition, but he's going to be rock bottom cheap. Probably not going to qualify very well if Joe Nemechek's success in that car has been any indication. And you've got some potential to make positive points there for whatever the minimum salary cap is in a game, and then you use him once and dump him and move on to the next guy. Allows you to take someone a little more expensive at the top of the grid.
Now, there's a real Class A tip there. I'm sure a lot of fantasy players would never have thought of that. They just, when they see somebody who's starting their first race, they probably think, unless they know the name from somewhere or they're somehow a fan of that driver, they're probably not going to even look at the possibility of making that pick. But that makes a lot of sense. That means you can pick higher dollar drivers above that and use him for whatever his minimum money is, and you almost know you're going to be positive. That's a really good tip. Great tip.
Thank you.
All right, so that's the
salary cap portion.
Yeah, that's the salary cap segment of our show. We want to save time to talk about the number one NASCAR fantasy game, which is still the Yahoo game, and we're going to talk about that now for the second half of the show. What's particularly important about Dover when looking at your Yahoo team this week?
The same thing is important every week. Salary cap or allocation management. You have to make sure that you've got drivers when they have the potential to have their 9 best races. That's most important in Group A and Group C, where you only get 1 pick per week. You've got 2 provisional drivers and 1 driver that you can start. The good news is that with Johnson struggling the way he has struggled up to this point, he's now a good pick and probably has not been over allocated. I think I've used him maybe twice and then got scared off of him and stopped using him. Didn't use him last week. Obviously, I should have. But you're coming to a track now where he has 8 wins. He has 12 top 5s and 17 top 10s. Puts him in by far the lead where wins are concerned in the top 3 in both the top 5 and top 10 category. So he's a nice consistent pick. He's a nice safe pick. Even if he doesn't win and score 120 points like he did last year, it's fairly likely that he could earn maximum points this week in Group A. Score somewhere up in that 100, and if somebody else sneaks into victory lane down in Group B, he doesn't have to score 120 points to be the best value this week. Last year, he could have won both races. If he hadn't jumped the restart in the first race, he probably would have won both races.
He actually kind of slow walked the restart, didn't he, in the first race?
Well, he said that
kind of laid back there a little bit.
Yeah, he said that Juan Pablo Montoya snookered him in the first race, but and Juan Pablo, I think, took a lot of pride in Johnson thinking he was that smart.
Yeah, I think so too. That might have been JPM's highlight of his career in Cup Series.
It could be. It's one of those things he'll remember long after he stops racing.
Right.
Then Matt Kenseth, since he didn't win last week, but he became fantasy relevant again by racing for the win. And this is a track where he's been consistently strong in the past. Open a file here real quick. I've got the wrong file open. I haven't referenced any of these numbers, by the way. Any of the numbers, by the way, that are in front of me, but I kept wondering why I'm seeing Pocono. That's because I am working on next week already.
It's good to be ahead of yourself.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
But Kenseth's been strong here in the past. He won as recently as 2011. He had a streak of top 5s there. A couple of bad races, and then he finished 7th in last fall. So when he brings his A game from 2008 through 2010, he had 5 consecutive top 5s. Took 1 race off, and then had 3 consecutive top 5s, including that victory that I just mentioned. When he brings his A game, he's great here. and this is one of his best opportunities to win and become that 11th different winner in 13 races, so that he can punch his ticket for the chase, or probably punch his ticket for the chase. That kind of motivation tends to work in his favor. So someone like Matt Kenseth is a strong pick in Group A. Jeff Gordon has 3 consecutive top 5s, so he's another strong pick. After you get past those 3 drivers, you really don't need to go a whole lot further down in that level. At the bottom level, you're back to it being either Kyle Larson or Austin Dillon. This week is a good time to pick them because there aren't really any good dark horses. All of the rookies have very minimal experience here overall. No Cup races or 1 Cup race, so you can't look for a good dark horse from there. Danica Patrick hasn't been particularly strong here. The underfunded teams don't run particularly well here. So this is the time to use one of your 18 allocations for either Kyle Larson or Austin Dillon. So you come to Group B, and that's where it always seems to get the most challenging. You've got a good convergence of recent momentum and recent Dover success in someone like Joey Logano, who has 4 consecutive top 10s at Dover and has been one of the best drivers all year. So if you're not getting down to your last 4 or 5 allocations for him, Logano's a good pick. Then you've got guys who will probably run a little bit better this week just because this is the home track. Martin Truex Jr. swept the top 10 in 2012, swept the ran badly in this race last year, but then finished 15th in the fall. Had 1 top 10 out of 2 races in 2011. So the majority of his attempts here in the past 3 years have been strong. He's someone that I would put on my roster and then watch practice and qualification. If he doesn't run well in practice or qualification, then you dump him and you go with someone else. So in Group B, this is one of those weeks where you definitely want to have 2 drivers that you're confident in, and maybe 2 drivers that you're not as confident in. Vickers had a great record on high-banked concrete tracks in the Nationwide Series. Didn't do quite so well when he moved to Cup, but he's got that in his arsenal. He's got that kind of tucked away, and he's been running strong in the most recent races with top 15s in, I think, 4 of the last 5 races is what I said earlier this week on the on Pit Row Hangout. He's another driver that deserves a spot on your roster just to see if he can practice well, and then actually watch him, pay attention, see what his 10-lap averages are, and if they're anywhere in the top half of that list, he's probably worth starting.
Is there any place, Dan, online where you can pull stats like on 10-lap averages and that kind of thing? Is anybody providing those breakouts, or you just have to watch it on the tube and kind of keep your own records?
Yeah, that's the best thing to do. J-Ski might have it. Every now and then I stumble across practice results there. But that's about it. No one's really. I used to do a practice story that showed all of the average to laps. It'd be nice if they published it a little bit better than they do, but it's also it can become a little meaningless because not everybody runs 10-lap runs,
right.
Long
yeah.
runs. So you need to know the guys that didn't run 10-lap runs how they ran in the 5 laps, and that's kind of hit or miss if you're not at the track. If Fox doesn't tell you who those drivers were, then you just have to do it by instinct.
Well, we got about 5 minutes. What any final thoughts on this race going into anything that you learned at Charlotte that we would apply, or maybe you could give somebody a little insight into how they pick their team, or can you give somebody some long-term what to look forward to in June and the tracks we're going to next?
This starts a streak of 5 races on fairly distinctly different tracks. We've got Dover, Pocono, coming up on Michigan, we're coming up on Kentucky, we're coming up on Daytona. You've got a bunch of tracks that are going to be different. So this is the part of the schedule where you really want to be on your A game. You can't afford to go from one week to the next without changing your roster. Uh,
Yeah, it's not
Dover
the
is
time
going
to not the week to sleep in, right?
right.
Not the
Uh,
month to sleep in.
and then after that, as soon as that streak is over of five unique tracks, we go to three flat tracks in a row.
Hmm.
So next week we'll talk about Pocono. That Pocono race could be one of the most important ones for a fantasy player because of the three flat track races that are going to come up 4 or 5 weeks after it. So it's a good time to study. Dover pretty much stands alone. It used to be a comparative with Dover, Bristol. But now that that track's reconfigured and reconfigured again, it's pretty much Dover is Dover, and you just have to get through this race with the best possible lineup, and then move on to the next one, and you can start to look at track types again.
All right, he is, of course, he's Dan Beaver, and you can follow Dan on Twitter at Fantasy Race, and follow us every week on the On Pit Row Facebook page for our Tuesday regular On Pit Row Hangout, and then these Thursday, mostly going to be on Thursdays, Fantasy Pitstop Hangouts that Dan and I are going to put together. So thanks for joining us today. If you did, if not, catch the replay. Definitely watch this before you make your picks this week, and I think you'll do better. Dan, thanks for your time, man.
Thank you.
All right.